Gentleman from Arkansas, the Vice Chair of the full committee, Mr. Hill, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the Chair. Chair Powell, thanks so much and welcome back to the committee. I want to pick up where Senator Tim Scott and Chair McHenry left off and reiterate my strong support for your comment yesterday in the Senate about the need to repropose the Basel III endgame. The Supreme Court's precedent, I think, makes clear that if a rule undergoes broad and material changes from the proposal to final rule, the public must be given a meaningful opportunity to review and comment on those changes. You generally share that view, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to seeing the results of the quantitative impact study and the separate comment period, as well as an interagency agreement you referenced yesterday. Because of Dodd-Frank's role and the Vice Chair for Supervision, Vice Chairman Barr's role and the Fed's role, would it be fair to say the Fed is a first among equals on proposing a rule like this? In other words, does the Fed have a supremacy position on determining whether it should be fully reproposed or not, or do you view it strictly as a collaborative basis? Just curious in your view on that.
I would say it's strictly collaborative, and I would say that our discussions with the FDIC, which Vice Chair Barr has actually been conducting, and the OCC, they've been very productive so far. So I want to make sure to say that we've continued to work our way through this, and I believe we will get fairly soon to a resolution of the remaining process issue.
Good. Well, let me turn from that subject to the Court's recent decision to overturn the so-called Chevron Doctrine. Many of us believe this was the first step to reining in decades, literally, of an unprecedented, uncontrolled growth in the administrative state. And so I think all of us on at least this side of the aisle are certainly saying to the Federal Reserve and other federal agencies in our jurisdiction that we want to reassert Article I authority over the direction that independent agencies work. Would it be fair to ask you to certify that because of this change in Chevron that the Fed would commit to promulgating new rules only if they're at the direction of an explicit congressional authorization?
So I think, first of all, we're studying that and several other decisions that have just come down in the last week or two, so I haven't got anything definitive for you on that. I think you know us to be an organization, I know us to be an organization that is strongly committed to the rule of law. Supreme Court says what the law is. We'll always do what we believe the law is.
Well, I'll submit that question maybe in more detail in writing, and maybe you'll have a chance to reflect on that. Back in February, you were on 60 Minutes, and you said the U.S. budget deficit, the national debt are unsustainable. Do you still view that the U.S. is on an unsustainable fiscal path?
I do. I think I tried to be clear that the level of the U.S. debt is not itself unsustainable, but the path that we're on is unsustainable, and I think that is not controversial.
I think many of us certainly agree with that, and we know that when the deficit's at 3 times the economic growth rate and growing, it's of concern, and it's contributed to inflation. Just 3 years ago in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, you gave a speech where you were confident that inflation was transitory, which I think we've come to realize that's not the case. This hearing is sort of a can't-miss opportunity for the Fed to demonstrate some humility on the monetary policy decisions, which some on this side of the aisle particularly think have made inflation worse. Your August 2020 Jackson Hole speech, you said the flexible average inflation targeting framework regarding 2%, that you would let it run above 2%. Was the Fed blinded by the previous 20 years of global change that was deflationary and or you were not alert enough in 2020 to be more cautious about that change in policy?
So we were certainly mindful of a long period of time in which there have been very low interest rates, but also very low inflation, suggesting that the neutral interest rate must have fallen quite substantially. That was the standard view. The thing we didn't see coming was the pandemic. It's not like everything went off the rails. It's like we had this pandemic, and it really changed the way the economy is working. We had a big crisis. We did a lot of things. So the concerns that led us to, those concerns that we were in a world of very low interest rates all the time.
But now wouldn't you say we're in a very opposite situation where because of reshoring and tariffs and other policies that are quite inflationary?
I would say this, those concerns are right now we have the policy rate in the mid fives, right? And we see the policy is restrictive, but clearly interest rates, the neutral interest rate must have moved up, at least in the short term. So I think that's the question we'll be asking ourselves in our review, which begins at the end of this year.
We look
is
forward
how
to
much
that.
of
Now
what
you
we
go
did
back to the chairman.
how much of what we did in that time period is relevant to the new world where rates appear to be higher?
The gentleman from Georgia.